Hello, this is Lyrelion, and welcome once again to All the Mods 9 here at Hack the Planet. Today, I just want to do a brief overview on Ars Nouveau's spellcrafting and how to design spells. We'll kind of go through my spell books and just take a look at some of the things that I have and how to put them together. First, I want to point out once again the website ars.guide. We do have a spell compendium there. You'll see that some of these are my spells that I have contributed, but I'm far from the only contributor here. Things are broken down into categories, so if you're just looking for ideas for new spells or trying to figure out, how can I do X, you can look and see if there's something similar to what you're looking for here just to get an idea. Some of these do require specific add-ons to be included, or in some cases that your server has activated the infinite spell configuration, which the server I'm on has not, so some of these would not work there, but if you're just running your own server or playing on a server that has done that, some of these spells may be available to you. So let's go back into the game. You may note that in my hotbar I do have 7 spell books. That is somewhat atypical. Most people don't carry that many. I like to play as sort of an archmage type character, so I do carry more spell books than the average player. I do have them categorized into different groups of spells. All of these are archmage, or in one case I do have a creative spell book, because again I'm playing on all the mods 9. But I have 10 spell slots in each book, so each book can hold up to 10 spells, and I just like to have that variety of 70 spells available to me at any time, whereas others are more inclined to just swap out a spell whenever you need it. You can always edit your spells. You don't have to go to any special block or table or anything like that to do it. You can just edit them on the fly, but I just like to have them available. So let's start out with my first spell book here. This is my single target, quote unquote, spell book. Some of these spells do have built-in AoE effects, but that's not really the focus here. These spells, you target one creature, and if things nearby them happen to get hit, that's great, but the main focus is bringing down that target creature. So you'll see here the 10 spells that are available. We're on spell 3 right now. This is kind of my main damage dealing spell that I use. I call it Zap. You can name the spells whatever you want. Some people like to just name it by the effect. Some people give them creative names. I like to name a lot of my spells after D&D spells because I have been playing D&D for a very long time, and if I name something after a D&D spell, it's going to just tell me right there exactly what that spell is going to do, because, oh, fireball, yeah, that's a big exploding ball of fire. So this spell here is an electric damage spell. We've got projectiles, so every spell in Ars Nouveau has to start with a form glyph. You'll notice the glyphs are broken down into forms, augments, and effects. If we look at the second page, these ones that are in red, those are filter glyphs. Those are counted as effects, but what those do is, like in this case, if you have this glyph, it will prevent it from affecting or either will cause it to or cause it not to target non-aerial creatures depending on the structure of your spell. So we're going to start out here with the form glyphs. With any glyph, you can hold down the left shift key to show you more about the glyph. Sometimes, like in these cases, it's just telling you, oh, the underfoot glyph targets the spell on the block beneath the player. Whereas others will give you a lot more detail. Like with Conjure Terrain, it tells you what you can modify it with in order to get different effects. So your basic form glyphs, There are 6 of them available here in all the mods 9. If you have other add-ons such as Ars Omega or not enough glyphs or something, you may have more available to you. Arc projectile is a gravity affected projectile, so it's similar to firing an arrow from a bow. Homing projectile is exactly what it sounds like. It's a projectile that does home in on nearby targets. Simple projectiles. Self will center the effect on you. Touch will affect whatever your cursor is on, as long as it's within range. And underfoot targets the block beneath you. So going back to this spell, we've got a projectile, so that means I can fire it at a distance. And we've got Hex. Hex is a tier 3 glyph that basically applies a debuff that causes the target to take more damage as long as they're under certain status effects. It also reduces the healing and mana regen. Mana regen tends to not come into play with most creatures, but can, if you're using this for PvP, then it will reduce the player's mana regen. So what this spell does here is you fire a projectile that debuffs the enemy to take more damage, and then you start doing electrical damage to them. So a spark discharge will do electric damage, and then discharge it in a small area around the creature, so it will hit targets near the original target. Because of the way iframes work in Minecraft, you can't just stack a bunch of damage on top of each other. Each time a damage source hits, it's going to look and see if they're still in their invulnerability frame. So by placing these delays, what you do is you spark discharge, delay, spark discharge again. That way that second set will hit them. If you just did spark discharge, spark discharge, spark discharge, you're only going to hit them once. But this way the spell hits them 3 separate times. Got similar spells here for fire, ice, venom, which is an earth-based spell, does poison damage. Cutting winds is a wind shear effect. Wind shear does more damage based on how high up in the air something is, so this is good for something like, say, the Ender Dragon or phantoms if they're turned on in your world. Railgun is a useful spell that takes advantage of the block shaper focus. This is a very useful spell if you have a good supply of obsidian, because the hardness of the block used determines the damage done. So using something like obsidian is going to maximize your potential damage. So what you do is you have a touch effect with sensitive. When you apply sensitive to touch, it causes the touch to target the air instead of what you're pointed at in the distance. So it also works on water as well. So if you can just point at the space in front of you and not have to worry about, oh, that creature's too far out of range. So you touch the air in front of you and place the block, which, like I said, obsidian is going to give you the highest damage. Then you launch that block forward at high velocity. Leap will send it flying in the direction that you're facing. And then after a short delay, it's going to snare that block in place, break it, and put it back into your inventory. Sometimes this last section of the spell doesn't work very well, especially if you fire something out of render range, but sometimes it works, and if it doesn't, you can always just go pick it up yourself. But this will fire that block, and if it hits something, it's going to do a pretty good amount of damage. Not going to go over all the spells that I've got. Decay is a good way to overwhelm the healing capabilities of another player. You put an amplified wither and an amplified hex on them, it is very hard to heal your way out of this damage effect. Reverse gravity launches something up into the air pretty high, hits them with a wind shear, and then uses gravity to slam them back down into the ground for fall damage. So we move on to the next book. This is my AoE damage spells. My preferred spell here is Chain Lightning. This is why I wear Ethermancer armor. I like the electric effects. So what Chain Lightning does is you fire a projectile, whatever it strikes, which I usually fire at the ground right in front of the enemy, creates a wall effect. And then that wall, when you modify it with sensitive, causes each block of that wall to then become a propagator of homing projectiles. So You create that wall, and then each block of the wall starts firing homing projectiles that then multiply. So you split 1 into 2, 2 into 4, and it's going to fire 4 homing projectiles from each square of that wall. It's going to do that a couple times. When those projectiles hit, they're going to cause a lightning strike. You'll notice on some of my spells I add a heal. So usually it's a heal with a dampen. The reason for that is there is a feature in Ars Nouveau where if you have certain equipment, certain buffs, the kindling thread, the fire focus, and stuff like that, they will add this buff where you debuff the enemy with the Hellfire effect, or I believe they may have changed the name to Mage Fire at the version we're in now. And what that does is it causes the enemy to skip their iframes if they get hit with a heal effect. So with a heal dampen, you're going to heal a small amount of damage, but it's going to make it where they don't have invulnerability frames, which allows all these lightning bolts to hit them in rapid fire, and you massively increase the amount of damage you're doing. That feature has been removed in version 1.21. It's been moved onto a specific glyph that is just for removing iframes, and that glyph is disabled by default. But since we're still playing in 1.20.1, that iframe skip is still available to me, so that's why you'll see these heal dampens in there. Blade Storm's another one of my favorites. This one, you've got a self-based spell, so it targets me when I cast it, and creates a rotating ring of projectiles around me using the orbit glyph that move at a pretty quick pace due to the accelerate. Again, it splits those projectiles, so each projectile becomes 4 projectiles. And when those projectiles strike an enemy that comes within range, they get hit with a cut amplify, which cut is a relatively low damage dealing effect, but it is free in terms of mana cost. So it's going to hit them, delay, and then hit them again. What I like to do with this spell is just cast it until I run out of mana, and I've got this whirling ring of dozens of projectiles around me that I can then just run through a crowd of enemies and slaughter everything as I run by. Bury. This one you fire a projectile. This one you want to target the ground underneath an enemy. It turns the blocks intangible in a small area, and it is about a 5x5 block. So you create that little area that drops them down into the ground, and then the effect ends, leaving them trapped under the block. So you can say fire this at the ground right in front of a zombie that's moving towards you. It'll fall into the pit, and then it'll suffocate. You'll see again, like with the first book, I've got lightning, I've got ice, I've got poison, I've got fire. So again, just a variety of elements here. Let's head on to the next book here. This is my defensive spells or buff spells. So something like a simple self-dispel. This is useful for getting rid of debuffs if you've been poisoned or something like that, or have mining fatigue. It's just like drinking a milk bucket from vanilla. Night Stalker is a night vision spell. Again, self. And when you cast Conjure Mage Light on yourself, it gives you night vision, and then we just extend that time out to make it last as long as possible. Shield creates a dome of mage blocks above you, so you cast it underfoot, so it targets the block below you to conjure mage blocks in a 3x3 area. And the pierce causes it to go up. When you do pierce on an underfoot, the spell is directed upwards, so it will pierce forward 3 blocks. And so what that does is you create a dome of mage blocks with you in the center. Lasts for a short time. This is useful for just blocking an attack that's coming at you. Say a ghast fires a fireball at you, you can just cast this and it just blocks that fireball. A lot of these are pretty self-explanatory. Mage Armor gives you some protection. Mage Sight lets you see magical creatures. Healing, Wall of Force, all pretty self-explanatory spells. So next we go to my utility spell book. This is my mining and harvesting and that kind of spells. So just my basic collection spell. This is for when I'm just down exploring and I see ore that I want to collect, or if I want to pick up pretty much anything. Fire projectile, break the block. Amplify lets it affect blocks that are harder, so it's the equivalent of a diamond pickaxe, so I can break things like obsidian. Extract uses the silk touch effect on it, and item pickup puts it into my inventory. So I can pick up a diamond ore, I can pick up an obsidian and just put it straight in my inventory. I do the extract with the silk touch so that I don't have to worry about carrying a fortune pickaxe with me. I can take care of that back at my base using my machinery that I have fortune built into. So I just collect the ore and take it with me. Tunnel digs a tunnel in front of me. So you fire a projectile. The pierce causes it to go into whatever surface I place. So if I fire this at, say, like a stone wall, it's going to pierce in 2 blocks before it starts. Then it's going to break, and it's, again, using extract in a AoE. So this is going to cause it to break a 3x3 tunnel. And because it's got the 2 pierces at the front and the 2 pierces at the end, it's going to pierce in 2 blocks, create a 3x3 ring, and pierce forward another 2 blocks and dig that entire 3x3x5 area out. Again, it's going to pick it up and put it straight in my inventory. Excavate's my big mining spell when I'm just trying to clear areas out. Projectile, burst, sensitives, kind of like with touch sensitive. Burst creates an area and then sensitive causes it to target the air. It will break anything in that range. And again, extract an item pickup. We got plant growth for harvesting, overgrowth for just making things grow, chopping down trees. These are all just basic utility spells. As we move on to the next book, this is more utility type spells. Stuff like self-heal, creating water blocks, removing water blocks, freezing water blocks. Charge is a way I can turn a creeper into a charged creeper without accidentally killing it. So I hit it with a lightning bolt, but it's dampened, so it does very little damage. Pass Wall is another one of my favorites. This is very similar to the tunnel spell, except instead of breaking the blocks, it just makes them intangible. And then I can pass through them, leaving no trail behind me. So this is very useful when I'm just exploring underground and I can see that cave on the map, 20 blocks over. But instead of having to break my way over to it, I can just walk through the wall. Next, I've got my summoning spellbook. I use the term summoning loosely. So we've got stuff like animating blocks, summon skeletal archers, summon skeletal warriors, vexes, wolves. Summon daylight, just for creating little mage lights. Summoning decoys. So this one I call Mage Hand. It's kind of an all-purpose. You just fire it at something. It can create a redstone signal. It can interact with blocks. It can dispel things. It can pick things up. It's kind of like the Mage Hand spell from Dungeons & Dragons. It's just a little utility item to have on hand. And then last we have my mobility-based spellbook. So again, you may recognize Vortex Warp from Dungeons & Dragons. This is a spell that you target an enemy and it teleports them to where you want them. Because of the accelerates, it's an almost instant cast, so you just fire it and you're going to hit the enemy. And it will blink them. And what you do with this is you take a warp scroll and set it to the target where you want them to go. You hit them and it will blink them to that warp scroll location that's in your offhand. One thing I use this for is for teleporting enemies to the void if they're annoying me. It's also very useful for capturing enemies for the Drigme farm because you can teleport them directly to a containment ritual. Telekinesis will pull an enemy to me. You fire it, you hit the enemy, and it causes them to exchange places with you while simultaneously blinking you to their location. So, in effect, you don't move, but they do. So they'll just appear right in front of you. Flight is exactly what it sounds like. Gives you elytra flight. It also helps launch you up into the air and gives you some momentum to get going. Return. You may have seen in one of my other videos. This is a very useful spell to have. You touch and place a rune on the ground. By using sensitive on the rune, it causes it to look in your inventory for a warp scroll that you're going to then blink to the location of that warp scroll. So I keep a warp scroll, actually a stabilized warp scroll, so that it works across dimensions, and I just keep that targeted to the foyer of my tower so that wherever I'm at, I can just set down a rune that will teleport me or another person to that location. Say I want somebody to come visit my tower, I can just place the rune and tell them to step on it, or I can do it myself. And got a couple of spells that let me cast buffs on others, so I can touch someone and give them elytra flight. I can touch someone and heal them. Dimension door is a very simple, just you teleport forward. This is useful for teleporting through walls because you don't have to be able to see the location. It's just going to teleport you forward a few blocks. So you can just teleport yourself through that wall that's in front of you. That is my spell books. Like I said, I did not go through every spell, but it kind of gives you the idea. You can always, like I said, left shift on a glyph to get an explanation of what that glyph does, and in some cases what you can augment it with. Most of it is pretty self-explanatory, as long as you're taking the time to read those tooltips. But those are my spells, and thank you for watching. And don't forget to like and subscribe.